Week 1 of Secrets of Power PQs have come and gone, and we have a new data set to look at. I'm going to be doing a meta-analysis of this first weekend of PQs and then updating my ongoing tier list. Before starting, I would like to point out that in this data set, there are only a very few tournaments that ended up being 7 rounds. To be 7 rounds, it needs 74 or more players. And if we go down this list, there's, I think, 4 in total. 3 in total that were 74 players. So a lot of these are 6-round events. A few of these are even 5-round events if they're under 32. 31, 30. There's a 10 one, but that's not reported. If it's not reported, it's not included in the data set. So there is a little bit of concern about the reliability, the validity, like how applicable basically the data set that we're working with currently is. But let's take a look at it and see if it shows us anything. So jumping in with Anakin DV, it is the most represented deck, which I'm not particularly surprised about since it was the breakout week 1 essentially deck from Seattle. A lot of people pick this up. A lot of people are finding success with it. 18.9% conversion rate out of 95 people is proving to be a very good deck. One thing to note is that for this larger sample size that's going to be more representative of the average swoop player, it is showing some cracks. We already knew Admiral Piett was a bad matchup. It is particularly bad in this sample. Yoda DV being bad in this sample. Qi'ra even being unfavored, and then Han1 Green assumed it was about a 50-50, and it is here in this sample, although it is slightly favoring Han1 Green. Gar was thought to be the deck really to beat the Anakin deck going into this weekend, and we're seeing even with this being the most represented deck, having the best representation of the average Star Wars player, that even then Gar is only barely beating Anakin given this small sample. So maybe this deck isn't as vulnerable to Gar as it was thought to be going into this weekend, but it is showing that, yep, Admiral Piett, which is very prominent in the meta, and that Yoda DV, which I wouldn't be surprised if it upticks in the coming weekends. Pretty bad matchups, possibly, for this deck. Then looking at Han1 Green, incredible conversion rate, 27.1%, 13 people out of 48. This deck slaps. Like, you remove Force Throw from the meta, and this guy just comes back in force. Any variant of him is reasonable at the moment, with Green being arguably the strongest. Just being able to drop Kellerin is absolutely incredible. This is likely the best deck at the moment. I am tempted to go as far as saying it is the S tier deck or the tier 0 deck, but I don't think it's that bad. It is questionable, though. If we do look at its matchups from this first weekend, really its only bad matchup is Yoda DV. It did do fairly poorly into Darth Vader Yellow, but I think that might be a fluke. So if we were to include Darth Vader Yellow, then it's showing to be 2 bad matchups, but then across the board, it is fairly green. I do think it would also be a little weak into Talzin Red or Yellow, but both are not really in the meta currently. So this deck just seems to be like the go-to deck to pick right now. Incredibly powerful. We knew that going into this. I think it was even better, though, than I thought. And I already had it as the second best deck. So I think it's clearly the best deck. Looking at Piett, 15.8% conversion rate, that is pretty good. 6 out of 38. Like, it's not terrible. I rated this deck very lowly, and I actually do stand by that rating, and a big reason for that is it's kind of just capitalizing on the Anakins right now, but then a lot of the rest of the meta just isn't good for it, and I think that's why when we look at the winning deck list, we're not seeing any Pietts because it's going to be way too hard to spike a top 8 with how many bad matchups there are for this deck in the meta. But it's a Qi'ra, not good. Reasonable amount of Gar, although this isn't really converting to top 8. But if it's hitting it at later rounds, it might block the earlier mid rounds. It might block the top 8 conversion. It's going to be seeing Qi'ras and Han1 Greens in top 8, and that definitely will be causing issues. And I wouldn't be surprised if stuff like Yoda is like 50-50 at worst. So I still think that this is a very risky deck to be taking. I'm not surprised that the conversion rate is slightly lower than Anakin, even though it is the deck that is beating the most you would expect, like, okay, this is beating the deck that is 10% of the meta. It's going to have a really good conversion rate, and it's just okay. It's not beating Anakin's conversion rate. If we include Beatle, it would drop even lower. It's like 11 point something then. And so, like, Anakin being more in the meta is kind of what is allowing this deck to exist. Sabine ECL, very, very, very good conversion rate, but overall win rate, not incredible. You know, we're looking at Anakin at nearly 55. We're looking at Han1 Green at 58. Even Admiral Piett at 55. Sabine's overall win rate, only 50%. Could be an argument here that there's a level of deck mastery that is relevant for Sabine in actually being able to convert a lot of games, but it is struggling to also convert top 8s. Big downside to this deck is it's losing into the 2 most played decks at the moment, which makes it a pretty bad choice to convert the top 8, but especially win in the top 8. But then on the opposite side of it, like 7-2 into Yoda, like, wow, that's incredible. 5-0 into Palpatine. It's a very polarized deck where if it hits the right matchup spread, it's going to just be able to jump to top 8, but then with how popular Han1 Green and Anakin DV are, it really is not a deck that's capable of converting those top 8s at the moment. So that really hasn't changed from the Beatle tier list to this week 1 PQ discussion. Qi'ra having a 25% conversion rate, very, very good, and this time coupled with a high win rate. So this is very comparable to Han1 Green, 27%, Qi'ra having a 25%. Matchups for Qi'ra being quite good from what we're seeing. There is the debate that maybe this Anakin matchup is a fluke, but we are seeing against the average Anakin player, Qi'ra does seem to be slightly favored. About 50-50 into Han1 Green, probably. I know Han1 Green considers Qi'ra to be one of its worst matchups, but that's also a big testament to how strong that deck is. So at least decent to Han1, absolutely eating Admiral Pietts. You know, overall, like, decent into aggro, decent into space aggro. This doesn't really have many bad matchups at the moment. I would say that I might have underrated the deck, putting it in tier 2 going into the week 1 predictions. This deck is performing very, very well and is showing not to really have too many terrible matchups, if any at all. Like, since Force Throw has been removed, and, you know, like, and also with Han2 Blue being a lot less represented, but Han2 Blue without Force Throw, it's not even that bad for Qi'ra. Boba Fett, I don't think this is a big surprise, at least to me. 6.7% conversion rate out of 30 decks. This was a deck that was very overrepresented in set 5 meta and never really made an impact. And here again, we're seeing it at a 50% win rate, and unlike Sabine, the other 50% win rate of these decks, it is not converting, and that's because it just doesn't really have any matchups to target. It's just either slightly losing or losing into pretty much everything meta. There's very little reason to play this deck at the moment, at least with Admiral Piett, the same color combination, also space-based. At least with Admiral Piett, it's really punishing Anakin, but then Anakin doesn't care too much about Boba DV. So hard to really say that there is a reason to be playing Boba DV at the moment, even though it has a reasonable representation. Cad Bane, 45% win rate, the first one under 50%. 0 conversions out of 29 players in the top 8. This deck is just very poorly positioned. It is losing relatively hard into the 2 most played decks. It's also losing to Admiral Piett, the 3rd most played deck at the moment. It's not able to convert Qi'ra, one of the top played decks at the moment. It's really just targeting Sabine, kind of, and Gar, and that's it. And like, other than that, maybe it has some like 50-50-ish matchups, but it has very few very favored matchups. Probably the only very favored matchup is Gar, and then it's going to be very unfavored in a lot of the meta matchups. It makes it so that Cad Bane really is not a great deck to be picking going into this next PQ weekend. Gar was looked at as kind of a way to target Anakin going into week 1, and I think we saw it really isn't the best way to be doing that. There are other options to target Anakin. Gar is, for some reason, I was actually surprised by this when I saw it. It is barely played against Han. It didn't play against Han1 Green this past weekend, but it is beating Anakin, Data Vault. It is beating Admiral Piett, 2 of the most played decks. We see that it's positive into Qi'ra, although it is getting eaten by Sabine, and then, as we said, Cad is represented reasonably in the format, and it's losing very hard to Cad Bane, so this is a fairly polarized deck. At least it is able to target a lot of the played decks at the moment, giving it the chance to spike into top 8, and then because it is good against the most played decks, it has a reasonable chance of spiking top 8 too, but it does have some really bad matchups. And I do think this is a deck very similar to Sabine, where when the skill level of the opponent is going up, the power of this deck is going down. So, seems to be a reasonable choice going into the next weekend of PQs, but maybe not the best. If you're expecting just a lot of Anakins, this could be the deck to choose, but I think we're seeing that Yoda might be the deck to play in that case. Yoda Green Force, reasonable win rate, 55%, towards the higher of the good win rates. 25% conversion rate, 6 out of 24 for this past weekend. Pretty good. Compared to Data Vault, though, with a 5 out of 15 conversion rate, 33%. And the Data Vault matchups, like if we look at Yoda as a whole, including Tarkentown, let's look at that now too. Tarkentown's not really represented. I think in big part that's just because of how powerful Green is showing to be, especially the Data Vault version. That extra 5 life over the Green Force base is extremely relevant. It's going to be helping in the Sabine matchup in particular, but not just the Sabine matchup, any aggressive matchup it's going to help a lot in, and really don't need Yoda as the 8-drop finisher when Bo-Katan exists. Bo-Katan's, even though it costs 1 more, it's a much better finisher than Yoda. The card's absolutely cracked. This does seem to be, the Yoda Data Vault version at least, does seem to be a good way to be targeting the Han1 Green, where again here the 5 health matters. Good way to be targeting Anakin Data Vault. May have an issue with Qi'ra, but I think that's up in the air. Definitely will have somewhat of an issue with Sabine, but the extra health helps a lot here. And can have an issue with maybe some space-based aggro, although we're not seeing that in this small sample. I think I was overlooking this deck a bit. I think that extra health that it has is extremely relevant when considering the ability to get to that Yoda flip to stabilize. So we're seeing both Yodas do reasonably well, and then the Yoda Data Vault version doing just incredibly, like 65% win rate. That is the highest out of all of the top performing decks, given it has a substantially smaller sample of only 15 compared to something like 48 or 95 of Anakin and Han1 Green. Rey Data Vault is 1 out of 14 converted. Good color combination. Flips 1 turn earlier than Yoda. Doing kind of different things than Yoda a little bit, though. Still reasonably similar enough. Playing green, heroic, value package. It's just like, it's the sample isn't going to be large enough to really give it too good of an assessment, and we are seeing like, oh, it's even winning the Anakin matchup, which it's supposed to be pretty unfavored into. Also something similar that we saw for Qi'ra. Again, that might just because of people are jumping on the Anakin deck and might not have the reps on it that they need to. I think that this deck is still fairly poorly positioned, but, you know, 55% win rate, that's not terrible. The 1 conversion rate is pretty concerning. We're going to cover down to Talzin Red. So looking at Palpatine Yellow, 2 converted. I think this deck, and Palpatine Colossus for that matter, are very good options, or potentially good options, going into this next PQ weekend. 58.5% overall win rate. This is kind of doing what Yoda's doing, but where Yoda has more points into the aggro strategies, it's kind of a little more balanced into the general field. Palpatine is basically full sacking aggro. This, I mean, if we looked at prior sets, we would be able to see a bigger sample size. It's not really changed much, and Sabine's gained Nemec from this set. It's going to be losing pretty hard to Sabine. I also think that it can struggle into, it might just be a little too slow for Anakin and Han1 Green, where Yoda seems to be at that sweet spot to beat those decks. So in my original tier list, I had said that I think in this spot that Yoda's good, Palpatine would probably always be better. That is proving to be incorrect, at least with this first wave of PQ data that we have, where Yoda being better, have that extra few health on Yoda, and that color combination, and the earlier flip. Here are my only hope high rolls, proving to actually be better than playing Palpatine. Han Blue Force, I think this is criminally underrepresented at the moment. People should... It should be... It shouldn't have fallen off so much after the Force Throw ban and then going into the Set 6 meta. This is still a very powerful deck. It's gotten really good Set 6 tools. Captain Rex, the 7/7/6 drop Sentinel, Bo-Katan, like... This deck is still very strong, very good conversion rate. Although, like, we're getting to a small sample size here, and then its matchups are pretty reasonable. Should be about 50-50 into Anakin Data Vault, if not slightly favored. Anakin doesn't want to see high power, low health units. Han1 Green, it is 2-0 against here, but when Han1 Green ramps, it can be a little bit of a challenge for Han2 Blue Force to deal with, because it can just get in there fast enough, but it does have good tools to deal with Han1 Green, being able to play those high power units, get Han stuff off the board, and then go into better top end like Bo-Katan, the 7/7 Sentinel as well. Although, like, well, I mean, the 7/7 Sentinel on 5 resources is just... If Han Green doesn't ramp and then they're throwing a 7/7 Sentinel down in front of it, have fun. Yeah, so it's not terrible into Han1 Green, but I don't know. I mean, the sample is just too low. I think Han2 Blue Force is very underrepresented at the moment. There's also an argument for Han2 Blue Non-Force now, because it's really just Qi'ra DV that it cares about, since it lost Force Throw, and now it has these big non-force units to play as well, but I think Qi'ra DV is still worth it. 58.3% win rate too, which is incredible, but the sample's pretty low. One of the newer decks, Palpatine 6 Data Vault, another blue-green villainy combination with Data Vault. This deck is just going very grindy, trying to maximize the plot cards through Palpatine leader. I'm not surprised it has a 45.7% win rate. It's probably very, very matchup dependent, needing the right matchup spread to win. And I mean, we're not going to gain too much because of the sample size. Looking at 15 matches played. Oh no, that's the wrong one. 7 matches played. Okay, yeah, there's nothing to gain. Could be It's actually weird. That shouldn't be the case. Why do we only have 7 matches played? Looking at the wrong one? Ah, looking at the wrong one. Okay, so it's eating the Anakin Skywalkers. That makes a bit of sense. We did see Anakin Skywalker might be a little weak to Qi'ra, at least the average Anakin Skywalker player, and now we're adding in a 7 flip leader that's just gaining a lot of value over the course of the game. Issue with this being, I think it's going to really struggle into some decks, but this deck, it's hard for me to say. I've not really looked at it. I've played against it a few times on Karabast. It hasn't been that impressive. Again, I'm not surprised about the 45.7% win rate. Might just need to like farm Anakins basically, and then I think as the Anakins player is getting better, that this deck might get worse. And then the last one we're going to be covering from this is Talzin Red Force. I guess Talzin Yellow Force is right under it, but these are mostly me. Oh wait, no, this is from PQ. So there's 7 other Talzin Yellows. That's interesting. So red, 47% win rate, really not that good. 1 conversion to top 8. Didn't actually convert the top 8 into a first. The matchup spread for both Talzins is not looking that good at the moment. Talzin Yellow, 2 of these Anakins are mine, and one of them I just egregiously punted. If I were to talk about that, that's a story for another video. So, moving my sample from this, like, it's even smaller, and then it looks even worse. So, yeah, I mean, it's hard to evaluate Talzin Yellow right now. That's why I also said we're going to stop at Talzin Red. And then Talzin Red, also not looking great. 0-3 into Anakin's pretty bad. Beating Han1 Green is not an incredible surprise. Being able to beat Piett is one of the reasons to choose red over yellow. Losing very hard to Boba. So Talzin not seeming like a great choice whether you're playing red or yellow, at least with the data we have currently. And I wanted to look at top 8 rates. It's no surprise that the 2 most represented decks are also that have high conversion rates are also 2 of the highest top 8 decks. With seeing Anakin was about double Han1 Green's play rate in all decks, 48 to 95, and then when we cut to top 8, we're seeing Han1 Green just really start catching up. Sabine Wren having a very good run and to get to top 8, but not really converting anything. Qi'ra being a great deck to get to top 8, and a reasonable deck to try to win top 8. Piett getting a good amount of top 8 conversions. Again, I think this is primarily because of the amount of Anakin in the format currently. Yoda Green Force, Yoda Data Vault. A lot of this stuff in terms of the ones that are getting multiple top 8s that we already know to be good. See a few odd Hans actually making it. There are some unique ones as we go further down the list, like Dedra Blue, which is a classic event control list with a new twist to it with Dedra instead of something like Bosk or common Bosk, and then the less common Qi'ra or Vader. Seeing some, we're seeing a couple Director Krennics. Due to Tarkentown. Another big issue with this isn't excluding, like I said, some of these lower sample size ones. So, like, for example, this Wat Tambor was a 5-round event. Very small event, converted to top 8 and then lost in the top 8 cut. Phasma was an interesting top 8 there. not incredibly surprised by this. So like some of the decks that I do consider lower tier, able to sneak into top 8, some of them winning top 8. One thing I did want to talk about in terms of the decks that won, or a few things, we are seeing the Yoda Data Vaults winning a couple of events. And then we're seeing Palpatine. There's actually a third Yoda Data Vault that also almost won an event, but then it hit the Palpatine Colossus, which is something I talked about from my video going into the week 1 DQs, where if Yoda is a very successful deck and a Palpatine manages to spike the right matchup spread, it is going to end up beating the Yoda. So that is something to keep in mind going forward, that if Yoda is going to increase in popularity, then we could end up seeing Palpatine come up to beat Yoda, which also allows Sabine to which Sabine is also good against Yoda, but then Sabine to come even more back into the meta because it's going to be really just eating the Palpatines. And then we are seeing two Quinlan Tarkin Towns, which I am a little low on this deck at the moment. They are smaller, so like 42, 49, 6-round events, which 6 rounds is still fairly reasonable. But we're not sure if this is going to be replicable in all metas, so like just consider your local meta. The Kylo is interesting, but again, a 45-player event. I think the biggest standout was the Phasma Green in an 83-player event. This is fairly impressive. I think it might be a fluke. We do tend to see these happen every so often, especially at the beginning of a set, where a random rogue deck spikes it and then doesn't really continue to perform throughout the set. I think this might be a case of that. Moving to the tier list. This is my updated tier list. It's changed a lot from last week's, or 2 weeks ago. This was my tier list from 2 weeks ago. This was my prediction for where things would fall as we go into PQ season, taking into account personal testing since then and looking at the PQ results. I have changed around things quite a bit. For the sake of time, I am just going to touch on a few of them. So I added a bunch of new decks to where I think they would fall in the tier list. I also added another tier list level because of all the decks that were being added. I wanted to separate them out somewhat, and basically as it goes down, it is decreasing in chance of converting top 8 and winning top 8. So basically, tier S is like, this should be like 30% of the meta, extremely high conversion rate, extremely high win rate, and then tier 6, I took away the F, because like even these decks can still win events or like top 8 events and win events, with tier 6 being an extremely unlikely of top 8ing and then an even more unlikely chance of converting to top 8. So Qi'ra has moved up to tier 1, Han1 Green has moved to the front of tier 1, and Yoda's moved up to tier 1. I think we're going to be seeing an uptick in Yoda Data Vault, especially because of how popular Anakin is right now. Yoda Data Vault seemingly good into Anakin. Data Vault and Han1 Green makes it a very good choice to attack the meta, and then seeming okay into the rest of the meta. Qi'ra, similarly, seeming to have just very good matchups across the board, not really having any hard losses anymore, where Han2 Blue Force used to be a deck that was very, very hard for this to beat. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Has the tools to kind of just beat anything. The composition of the deck doesn't matter a lot. For example, like, not having Super Laser Blast versus Palpatine is going to hurt a lot. But if you happen to have 2 or 3 in your deck, then you're going to be a lot more resilient to a deck like Palpatine. The Relentless, if something like Dedra Blue Event Control popped up, it has the tools to beat that. So part of the issue, though, with Qi'ra is like not having the right 70 cards with Data Vault into whatever meta you hit. But if you do have the right deck composition, this is a very potent deck, and we're seeing it perform as such. Han2 Blue Force, very, very strong. Anakin has moved down to tier 2, because I think it's just suffering from being targeted too much right now. Like, there really isn't much of a reason to be playing Admiral Piett besides its ability to beat Anakin. And yet we're just seeing a bunch of Piett. So as long as like Piett's such a big part of the meta, then Anakin's gonna really be struggling. And now with Yoda data vault as well, I think Anakin has to fall down to the top of tier 2. I think it's still going to be one of the best choices for converting that top 8, but maybe not the best at winning the top 8 anymore. And then we have a lot of off bases in tier 2. So we have regular Han2 Blue, we have Han1 Green ECL, which has had some reasonable performances. We have the alternative Han1 Blue, which, again, there's very little reason to choose these over Han1 Green, but some people do, and they are finding reasonable success with them. Krennic over Qi'ra. Again, still very good with the Krennic as the leader, but there's very little reason to choose this over Qi'ra. I'd say Krennic might even be a little too high. And then Han2 ECL, arguably, could be another tier 1 deck. Has a very good conversion rate, seems to have a very good matchup spread, just an overall very good 50-50 deck. That stayed the same. And the Han1 Blue stayed the same. And then Quinlan as well. I still have struggled with this one. I think it should have fallen, but it did win 2 PQs, even though they were smaller ones. It doesn't really seem... It seems to be losing into the most played decks in the format. It doesn't really seem to have anything that it's really targeting. But it won 2 PQs. It had an okay conversion rate. I could see this easily dropping from tier 2, moving into week 3 of PQs. Talzin Yellow solidifying itself in tier 3. Not really solidifying itself in tier 3, but me trying to remove my bias and moving it from the top of tier 2 down to the top of tier 3. That still might be my bias showing. Still has a very good matchup into Anakin, Han1 Green. Okay matchup into Qi'ra. Very good into Han2 Blue. Reasonable into Han2 ECL. Like, for the most part, good and reasonable into Quinlan. Like, it's like 50-50 or better into basically all the tier 1 or 2 decks except for Yoda. So it is a very good deck to target these tier 1 and tier 2 decks, but then a lot of the decks below it, it's going to struggle with. A lot of the lower tier space aggro decks, that if it hits them in the early rounds, for example, at this last PQ I went to in round 4, I think it was, I hit a space aggro deck. I had punted a game against my teammate Dark, playing Anakin Data Vault. I'd punted the match really hard and ended up suffering an early loss because of that, which then set me up to hit decks like space aggro. Ended up pulling a space aggro, and that was all that could be said. I was out. So this can really struggle into some of the less represented decks in the meta. Even Piett Red is a reasonably hard matchup for this deck, and that is the 3rd most represented deck currently, so that is a very big argument for not playing it. So it's very polarized at the moment. Then we have like the Palpatines and the Iden suffering from draws. Nothing's really changed there. Sabine also like needing to hit the right, like all these really just needing to hit the right bracket. Gar needing to hit the right bracket. All of these tier 3 decks have a lot of potential, but they also have some really big risks. Tier 4 decks that can kind of target some things in the meta, or just like not performing that well. Like Sabine Yellow is pretty decent, has a handful of strong players that do pilot it very well, but we have Sabine ECL established as a very good deck, or not very good deck, but like doing what the Sabine is intended to do. Admiral Piett really struggling into decks like Han1 Green, but finding a lot of success if it hits stuff like Anakin. But then it's just like it's really struggling into the tier 1, tier 2 beside Anakin. Odd Han, I reluctantly have dropped down from tier 1. Again, I think this might be issue with familiarity of the deck and its lines, but based on what we're seeing so far, it is falling, just like the other pilot and space decks. It is falling down to the lower tiers, in my opinion. Have some new additions with Sabe through Palpatine. Kind of want to see how these decks perform moving forward. I suspect they will be in the lower tiers. Sabe Tarkentown did win an event. Then in tier 5, we do have like Boba DV moving down, we have the Kylos moving down, we have Bosk being added, we have Yoda, Cad moving down. A lot of the tier 4 moved down to tier 5. A lot of the tier 5 moved down to tier 6 just to like add more space and decks to the tier list. Yoda Tarkin Town, Cad Tarkin Town just not really having the matchup spreads that are being looked like. A lot of these decks in general don't have the matchup spreads that are being looked for. They can spike top 8s, they can even spike events. We did see a Kylo Datavault win a PQ. Won a 45-person PQ, so again, a little bit on the smaller side. So these can spike events, they can spike the top 8, it's just I don't think that their success rate is going to be too high. And then tier 6, which we're dropping down even another step, where these are going to really struggle to get that top 8 conversion. I would even say Thrawn should probably be all the way at the bottom. So that's my updated tier list moving into week 2 of PQs for Secrets of Power. I will be updating again in 1 to 2 weeks. If you like this, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. May the cards be with you, and good luck in this weekend's PQs to those playing.